Alrighty, what's going on? Welcome to possibly the most controversial Fortnite season rating of all time. Now, this is not going to be like a tier list style, this is just going to be me sort of ranking the seasons from worst to best, and in my very controversial opinion. From what I've heard from a lot of people, like my friends and stuff, they do not agree with me at all, which I think will make for a really interesting video to see my opinions on things. I'm not going to take too long with this intro, nor am I going to take too long with each season. I'm just sort of going to give a quick rundown, maybe 1 or 2 minutes of why I think this season is rated the way that it is, and then I'm going to move on. Feel free to say why you agree or, well, most likely disagree with my opinions in the comments below. And without further ado, let's get into this. This is me, the Anti-Sweat, rating every single season from worst to best. Let's go. Now, here's where the controversy already starts. People are going to hate me for this one, but this is the season that made me quit Fortnite for a few seasons. This season is Chapter 2 Season 4, the Stark season, and I know everybody loved it, and undeniably, it had a good loot pool, the Stark POI was fun, but if we're thinking about it from just logistics, they changed basically nothing the whole season besides that one Stark part of the map. For example, at the very beginning of the season, they had almost no changes whatsoever to the map, and then they added that one Stark POI, and that was it. They didn't change anything else for the rest of the season with the map besides those little tiny zones, and then all the mythics, in my opinion, were not as fun as before. I do really like the idea of the superpowers as mythics, but they were a little bit lame and a little bit either too weak or too strong, so in my opinion, it was not the play. But thinking of it from the part that really makes me hate the season is the fact that me, someone who likes Marvel, I'm literally wearing the Spider-Gwen skin in this gameplay. I like Marvel, don't get me wrong, but an entire season based off of something that's not Fortnite is not only extremely lazy, but it just seems like an advertisement. And that mindset of basically not caring about the game, not caring about the storyline, and only caring about making money from an advertisement for Marvel really drove me away from the game, and I basically didn't start like really playing until 3 seasons later because of how much this pissed me off. So yeah, that is my least favorite season of all time. So these next few are probably going to be a little bit more, agreeable with most people. I feel like a lot of people agree with these opinions. But first off, we're going to be starting with my second least favorite season, which is Chapter 2 Season 6. So Chapter 2 Season 6, I did like the Spire. I thought it was a great POI. I did like the bows, but everything else about the season was extremely annoying. Having to craft these items was so frustrating, and for me, someone who probably only played like 5 hours of the season but watched a lot of YouTube on it, my opinion, and pretty much everyone else's opinion, seemed to be that this season was just too much of a grind to get anything done. Plus, it was really weird. I can't tell if I like or I hate the orange map, and it was just a really... It seems like I was living in a fever dream every time I played the game because it was so weird and so unlike anything we'd ever had, but in a bad, boring way. No one asked for a primal season. The animals, other than the raptors, were pretty cool, but still to this day, they don't really know what they want to do with them, so I don't know what I think about those, honestly. Overall, just was a very boring season, and one that you had to grind so much to get anything done. And a lot of the guns they added, a lot of the primal weapons and a lot of the mechanical weapons were really bad, so there was like no point for them to be in the game. And it made it more like Minecraft. And I want to play Fortnite right now, not Minecraft. So yeah, not a very good season. And next up, we have what probably a lot of people would consider to be their least favorite season. This is Chapter 1 Season 10. Now, there was a lot I liked about Chapter 1 Season 10. There was a lot of cool POIs that were added, and there was a lot of cool guns that were brought into the loot pool. And I really liked how they brought some things back, such as the prison by Moisty Mire and stuff. And there was some cool things about it, but for the most part, it was just way too much. This was an example of a season where they did too much, where every single week we were not only getting new guns and POIs, but all these POIs had these little quirks that made them basically unplayable, not to mention the mechs. I mean, come on, the mechs. Worst addition to the game that they've ever made. And I mean, they had the audacity to bring them back later, which I thought was dumb, but the mechs basically ruined the season. All of these changes was too much to the point where you could never really know the meta because there was no meta. It was all just chaos. So overall, there was a lot of good changes, but the bad outweighs the good so much that in the end, I don't think it was a good season at all. They tried to mess with a lot of things, for example, turbo building, without really asking anybody what they thought about it, or like telling them, hey, we're going to be trying these new things. So in the end, it really just screwed up a lot and had the community in a lot of distrust with Epic Games. So not a very good job, Epic. And what did Epic Games do to redeem themselves? They brought our next season, Chapter 2 Season 1. Now this season was weird because this was at the point where there was the most attention on Fortnite that it had ever had before, and they had this big new map and this basically revamped game, and it all was looking really out of this world and phenomenal and like nothing gaming had ever seen until a month later, nothing had changed, and then 2 months, nothing had changed, and eventually, 128 days later, we have almost nothing changed, a map that was cool for the first 2 weeks and then got really boring afterwards, same with the loot pool. Everyone was like level 300 in their battle pass, and really, the season just did not allow for a lot of change, and I think they wanted to bring back the OG vibe of having a really simple game, but they didn't really think about what they just did, which was have a game where every single week we were getting insane changes. So it was like the polar opposite of the last season, and you can't really have that. You need to have a good mix of both. And in the end, this really destroyed a lot of the love for the season. Nothing really happened, and while the Star Wars event and the winter event were absolutely phenomenal, in the end, those were very small parts of a very long season. And a lot of people hate this season for that, and it could have been a really good season, but unfortunately they just didn't do quite enough with it, and that's why it's so down low on the list. Now this next season is really unique, and I really struggled with figuring out where to put it on this list, but it's Chapter 2 Season 8. The beginning of the season was so atrocious and so bad and paled in comparison to the event that we just had, promising so much more than we got, that it is unforgivable. The minuscule amount of changes that were added to the game. It felt like the same game. Nobody enjoyed the beginning of this season. The thing is that about the last month of the season, starting with like Fortnitemares and stuff, it really kicked up, and the game was actually having a lot of changes, and a lot of big changes at that. They brought back some of my favorite items like the grappler, and the loot pool was basically completely different by the end, and the map had a lot of cool changes to it. A couple cool changes to it, I'll say that. But I mean, honestly, it was not enough to redeem what they had done at the start, and while I have so much nostalgia for sitting there and playing the game a long time because I wanted to basically get what I could out of Chapter 2 because of all the hype for Chapter 3. Honestly, Chapter 3 is not Chapter 2 Season 8, and I don't think I can let that nostalgia cloud my vision when I think about how bad the season was for about the first month. Plus, it didn't have a very good battle pass, and honestly, it really let down a lot of areas that I think that the end of the season was pretty good and really fun, but it did not make up for what we lost at the start and for a lot of the season. So honestly, I'm going to have to rate this one here. As much as I had a blast at the end of the season, if we're thinking about this statistically, it was not it. Besides the really cool event, there really was nothing that was a proper send-off for the chapter when it really had a lot of potential if you could have grown on what they already added. But in the end, not enough was changed to make this a really good season. Now here's where people are going to hate my guts. I have Chapter 1 Season 6 up next. Now you might be saying, why are you ranking an OG season so low on this list? But I personally think this was the worst quote-unquote OG season of all time. This was sort of the end of like the super OG days. But I just don't think that Fortnitemares with the zombies was very good. I remember the second time I ever played this game, it was the second time I ever did this. I went over to my friend's house and I played for like 10 hours straight with them. And I remember the zombies being so unbelievably annoying. And now that I have gone back and seen a lot of the game, and this is when I started sort of following the game, and just watching it from a sort of outside perspective, I started to see how annoying everything was and how honestly there was not a lot of changes. The middle of the map was really cool, but that's basically the only map change they had besides the little cube runes, and the loot pool wasn't tremendous that season. And overall, I just think that there's a lot of better seasons in Fortnite, especially if we're talking Chapter 1 seasons. So it's not that this is necessarily a bad season, it's just not a good season. Now, these next seasons are a little bit of a gray area because this is the part where I realize Fortnite has like 20 some seasons. That's insane. It's hard to rank them. So a lot of these sound like they might be too low or too high, but honestly, I think it's just right thinking about comparing them to all the other seasons in Fortnite. Because next up, I have Chapter 1 Season 1. I didn't put Season 0 on this because it's technically not a season, but OG Fortnite, I'm just sort of thinking of it from the perspective of A, I didn't play back then or even know what the game was, but B, if I could go back to a season, do I really want to go play Chapter 1 Season 1? Because as OG as it is, Honestly, the map was not quite refined yet, and the loot pool was extremely mid. And as much as I do love the OG days, anytime I see a clip from Chapter 1 Season 1, that's not really the game I think of when I think of Fortnite. I think of a better OG season like Season 2 or Season 3. So while this certainly was Fortnite's basically starting point, and it was the start for a tremendous game, I don't think that compared to other seasons it really holds up. Just because even though this is kind of how it works, it didn't have a lot going for it, and there wasn't really a lot in the game, but that's kind of how it works when you have games that start out. So yeah, honestly, not like it's a bad season, I just have no clue where to rank this in comparison to the other seasons. Another season with a little bit more gray area is Chapter 3 Season 3. So this is a season that at the beginning I thought was absolutely fantastic. There was one big issue, which is that the loot pool was absolutely awful and they actually didn't unvault a single weapon, which was terrible. But they added some new guns, even though the guns at the start were not very viable, and even near the end they were still pretty mid. I honestly cannot say that this season was bad at the start. I think that the map was absolutely fantastic, and even though the loot pool didn't change, I was having a blast at the start of the season, not to mention the amazing battle pass. The XP wasn't too great for like the first few days, but honestly, this season was so fun at the start, and for about the first month, it was absolutely tremendous. Until I got burnt out. You see, over the summer, I had a lot of free time on my hands, and I was not using it to play Fortnite because really it got a little bit repetitive just because I had been playing so much for the past 3 seasons that I just did not really want to play a ton of Fortnite. And I think a lot of people feel the same because a lot of people have expressed this concern that this season was very long, and throughout this season it got boring near the middle. And what they did to basically try and reconcile that is make a bunch of changes, add like twice as much stuff to the loot pool, and add all of these new map changes, but none of them really felt that unique or viable. And you can hear about this in my season review, but honestly, a lot of these changes felt like they were just kind of random, and nobody really cared about them. The POIs switching between old locations were cool, but there is just too many of them. And honestly, it really just felt like Season 10 all over again, where they added all of these changes to sort of make up for what they thought was a boring game. And instead, it just made it so that it was all so cluttered and there was just way too much. And some of it was cool, but some of it wasn't. And in the end, the Dragon Ball event was cool. But other than that, the last half of the season was way worse than the beginning of the season, despite having a lot more changes. And I think that it honestly was just, it made me so burnt out on the game that I didn't really play it that much, and honestly brought the season down a lot. Now this next season would have been rated worse than the other season had the other season been better. This is Chapter 3 Season 2, which came right before it, and I think that this season honestly it was a little bit predictable, a lot of the things they did, so it wasn't quite as exciting as some of the other seasons. But it was still a good season regardless. This is the season that we got Zero Build, which is now probably the favorite game mode of the community, and honestly the game mode that I've been playing a little bit more than the others. And I actually really liked this season because of the amount of changes that they made. It felt like just enough, and it wasn't quite exciting, but it wasn't also disappointing at the same time. It was just enough to make us satisfied. The loot pool was decent, the map was decent, and nothing was quite amazing, but at the same time it wasn't bad. And I loved Zero Build. I still love playing Zero Build to this day. One of the best and biggest things I've ever done to this game, and it's an absolute blast, and I'm so glad that they did it. The event was pretty mid, honestly, but the storyline was very cool this season, and overall, it was just a good season that I really liked. And it was a little bit predictable and a little bit underwhelming in terms of the excitement and uniqueness factor, but at the same time, it was also a pretty good season. So I gotta rate this one a little bit higher than the last one. It was predictable. It wasn't exciting. It was kind of not bland, but just a little bit plain, but I liked it. Unfortunately, this is the season that the shotgun change happened, so while it was really good for the guns that were in the game and made me really love the auto shotgun, it removed one pumps, which is the worst thing they've ever done to this game, so I gotta bring the season down a little bit for that. Now this may be one of, if not the most controversial parts of this video. Next up, I have Chapter 2 Season 2. Now let me explain. This is the season that I kind of sort of started, because any other season that I sort of had and owned on my own in Chapter 1, I really only got to own for like a little bit before I got grounded from it, and then didn't have it for a little while. And I did play a little bit at my friends' houses, maybe like once every 2 weeks or so. But honestly, I did not play much of Chapter 1, and this is when I actually got Fortnite on my Xbox, so this is kind of like when I started and was playing every day and stuff, and actually got good at the game instead of barely knowing how to play it. So this is kind of when I started, and, well, this was good for me because it was so simple, but it was bad in terms of how simple it was. I think there's some charm to it, I guess I should say. There's some charm to how simple it was, but admittedly, it got a little bit boring. So this season should have been the first season of Chapter 2, basically, because it started off with a bang, honestly. I am not a big fan of the theme, but I think the additions of the mythics and the POIs that they added were really cool. And they changed a lot, but not to the point where it felt like a whole different game. So it was pretty similar to the Chapter 3 Season 2, where it was like there wasn't a ton changed that was not like expected, but then the mythics and bosses were completely different and would come to change the game forever. And I really enjoyed them, even if they were a little bit overpowered. They were fun, but this season suffered from the same issue as the first season of Chapter 2, which is that it lasted 124 days, and basically nothing changed. I understand a little bit of that was because of COVID, but that's not really an excuse to have the season be so long. You know, it had the Travis Scott event, which is really cool, and then the Doomsday event, which was really revealing for the storyline. But I think overall, the reason that I don't like this season very much is not because of what they added wasn't cool. It's because they didn't add anything, basically, for almost 3 or 4 months, which was really, really stupid. And while it was still fun, and a lot of people had fun because we were all in lockdown playing the game, I don't think that from a statistical standpoint, that makes it okay for them to not change anything, basically. And there was really limited communication. I just remember at the time, a lot of people remember the season as being really fun, but I remember so many people, so many big streamers, and so many of my friends being so pissed off and saying this game is boring, something needs to change. And I think that we look back on this season with a lot of nostalgia, and honestly, this is higher rated than it would have been as I was playing it, because I'm realizing just how much fun I had. I actually thought this was the worst season of all time whenever this happened, but I didn't really realize a lot of people like the season, which is why I think it's very controversial for me to sort of not like it that much. It was just mid. It was an extremely mid season, because it would have been a good season if it would have not been so long and if they would have changed a little bit more. But it was yet another season that suffers from being decent at the start, but then really falling off because of how long it took. And I don't quite understand why this is everybody's favorite season. While it has grown on me since the season ended, I honestly just think that there was not enough to really warrant it being as long as it was, and even the things at the start, while they were cool, were not the best changes we've ever had. And if we're just thinking about this, it was a little bit fun, but compared to other seasons, it was not that fun. And just because of lockdown making it fun because everyone was playing doesn't mean that the season itself was actually that good. So honestly, I can't rate this one any higher than about a mid-tier season. Now, I know a lot of people are going to hate me for putting this above Season 2, but I have Chapter 2 Season 5. Yeah, I don't think a lot of people really like this season, but I was actually a big fan. After we came off of my least favorite season of all time, I feel like they did make a lot of good changes, and the loot pool wasn't exactly fantastic, but it was pretty good. And we had the gold and NPCs, which was a massive change to the game that still affects it a lot to this day. And we had some amazing map changes, with Salty Towers being not quite the tilted we all know and love, but pretty cool. And a lot of OG POIs being brought back, along with things like Hunter's Haven and the Coliseum feeling sort of out of place, but in a good way, as the way it was sort of supposed to be random. And I actually loved the map this season and think that they made a lot of good changes there. And honestly, I have a lot of nostalgia for this season because I sort of found a little bit of love for Fortnite after I had sort of lost it all. I really enjoyed the Mandalorian's mythic, and honestly, Stealthy Stronghold was one of my favorite POIs, and I landed there a lot after then. But overall, this season was fantastic, except for the updates. Throughout the season, the updates were a little bit bland, and honestly, a lot of the exotics and mythics that were added were not quite as exciting as I think Epic Games anticipated. This is my third favorite season of Chapter 2, and I think it was a pretty dang good season. It just suffered from a lack of a couple more updates that would have been more impactful, but overall was a pretty dang good season. So next up, I have Chapter 2 Season 7, my second favorite season of Chapter 2, and I really enjoyed this season. After being grounded for a little bit and not playing video games for a while, I came back to Fortnite being more fun than I sort of remembered it had been before, and I found that love for the game again. I think that the loot pool this season was fantastic with the railgun and the recon scanner and the pulse rifle being introduced, along with a couple alien weapons, and the updates this season were really good. The map could have used a few more changes, but honestly, I think it delivered pretty well, and while it certainly wasn't the best map we've ever had, it was a pretty good map, and it was one that I think did well enough. I think the Mothership minigame was a big change to the game that was really interesting. I think that introducing battle stars was a good idea, and while it's certainly not worked out completely now, I do think that it's better than what we had before. And I think that overall the season was very bright, very lively, very good for a summer season, and one that I really enjoyed coming back to the game. It sort of started my hate for sweats and my journey to become the anti-sweat, but honestly, other than that, and the sweats kind of ruining it a little bit at the end, I really enjoyed it. The alien zones where like the POIs were being abducted were absolutely amazing and really fun, and honestly this season was just such a fun one to grind. I had an absolute blast. Ended up getting level 199 and a half, so I played this game a lot more than I had played Fortnite in a little bit. So yeah, overall, really solid season. This is also the first season I ever did a season review on, so there's a little bit of nostalgia there too. Now here's where things kick up a notch. I have Chapter 1 Season 3. Now, I didn't play this season, and I didn't even know Fortnite was a thing about the time the season was out, and honestly, I can't really rate it that well because I didn't play it that much, but I do feel like watching all these old clips of Chapter 1 Season 3, it is an absolutely fantastic season. So, obviously it's OG, and I don't know a lot of stuff that was changed that season, but I do know that this was the John Wick season, so a lot of cool nostalgia from there from a lot of people. And when I think of OG Fortnite, this is usually the season I think of. So honestly, while I'm pretty sure there wasn't like a ton of map changes, I think maybe Risky was added and a couple more. I think that overall, for a season that literally basically defines OG Fortnite, I have to put it pretty high on the list. But it wasn't my favorite OG season, but it's definitely up there. I just don't really know how to rate it necessarily because I don't have the nostalgic ties to it because I never played it. But from what I've seen, it was a really good season, just not one that I think is better than a few others. Now, next up we have a similar story with Chapter 1 Season 4. Now this is one that I've seen a lot of YouTube videos on, and I think this is when Fortnite was really starting to become popular. But this was the superhero season. We had Dusty, which was one of my favorite POIs of all time when it got to be really overgrown. And we had the Hop Rocks, and there was a couple more map changes with the meteors destroying things. And honestly, just a lot of great changes this season. I just love all of the YouTube videos that were made out of this, and there was so much good content, and this was really like peak Fortnite. This season was basically peak Fortnite, honestly. Maybe not the most peak Fortnite season, but one of the most peak Fortnite seasons. And honestly, I think this is the one that a lot of people are going to remember as their favorite season because just how amazing a lot of the changes were. And once again, I didn't get to play this season, but I do think that from what I've seen from it, it was an absolutely fantastic season. Now, this is surprising, but we still have 7 more seasons to go. That's how many seasons are in this game. But this next season, I don't really know quite where to rank it yet because it's the season that we're currently in, Chapter 3, Season 4. Now this season isn't over, but the amount of fun I'm having this season I think makes it better than the past couple, just because I didn't play those past 2 OG seasons to be able to rank them any higher than a season that I've been playing every single day. So it's a little bit weird trying to rank those past 2, and especially the OG seasons that I didn't really get to play. But overall, I think that I've made some fair judgments, just maybe not the most popular opinions. But I have Chapter 3 Season 4 up next, and this season so far has been a blast. Finally, for the first time in Chapter 3, we've seen a loot pool change to be something that we've never really had before. The Rapid Fire is my favorite SMG in the game, maybe my second or third favorite gun in the entire game. I absolutely love it, and that's just really fun to play around with. The shotguns are amazing. The Eva Chrome weapons are my favorite guns right now to use, and an integral part of my loadout, and especially a lot of the map changes that they've made have just been absolutely fantastic, and the flow of the game feels so nice. I'm starting to be able to win games every single day again, and I think me and my friends are all just having so much fun playing this season that it warrants me to put it higher than some of the others that people may think are better. The storyline this season, it's very clear, is going to be a very important thing, and while I certainly can't make some final judgments on it because it's not over yet, It's been an amazing experience so far, which is why I'm rating it so high up. We're going back to Chapter 1 with this next one. It's Chapter 1, Season 8. Now, this season, originally, I thought I would place higher than a couple others, but I do think that there's a couple others that are better than it. Now, Chapter 1, Season 8 brought some absolutely fantastic map changes, some cool weapons to the loot pool, a pretty good battle pass, and just a lot of changes that generally made Chapter 1 so fun. And honestly, I think the map was my favorite part of this whole season. The event was absolutely crazy too, being able to unvault a gun and then watching Tilted and things get destroyed. It was a great way to basically hype up what was coming next, and I think that this season was absolutely fantastic, and that's why it's my 6th favorite season of all time. We are now moving into the top 5, ladies and gentlemen, my top 5 favorite seasons of all time, starting out with Chapter 3, Season 1. Now, when the map flipped, it was insane. It is the most hyped I've ever been. For probably anything ever, it was crazy to see the new map. The new map is fantastic, and it was a great start to a great chapter. While the loot pool was a little bit scuffed with the shotguns being a little bit too weak and the Stinger SMG being overpowered, we did have some great guns like the MK, and overall this season had so many changes throughout it. Like we had Tilted and Klombo come, which was absolutely amazing. And then the next week we get things like the heavy shotgun, and then literally right after that, Covert Canyon. It was insane to see all these changes back to back. So much happened this season. It was such a better launch than Chapter 2, and honestly, it will go down as maybe one of the most nostalgic seasons of all time for me. An absolutely fantastic way to start off the chapter, and honestly, some of the most hyped I've ever been for anything in my life. And I will always remember the first time that I saw that map and my first initial reaction being so insane, and throughout the season it carried on that fun, along with it being the first season where I started to try to get good against sweats, and that's why I'm good at the game now. So yeah, thank you Chapter 3 Season 1 for being absolutely fantastic. It was a close race between these two. And honestly, I think you might be able to switch Chapter 3 Season 1 and Chapter 1 Season 7 pretty much interchangeably. But Chapter 1 Season 7 is next up on this list, and this is basically when I started. I had it on my dad's iPad for 2 days before I got grounded from it and started to basically play it a little bit more at my friends' houses. But while there certainly were things like the Infinity Blade and the Planes that were a little bit, not the best, most fun items of all time, I think that the map this season, once again, the map was crazy good with the snow parts of the map coming in. And then we had Winterfest, which was really, really fun. And I just remember all of the cool items and things, like I actually like the boombox and things, and all of these different guns and items that they brought into the game. And just looking back at clips from them, winter 2018 really was a magical time for Fortnite, and I think that this season is worthy of being the 4th best season of all time. We are now entering top 3 territory, and to start it off with number 3, we have Chapter 1 Season 5. You know it's gotta be a classic. My favorite, truly OG season of Fortnite. Chapter 1 Season 5 brought my favorite POI of all time, Paradise Palms, in an absolutely amazing desert biome, along with a lot of super fun changes to the loot pool, along with things like golf carts, our first real vehicle besides the shopping carts. And I mean, come on, when I think of OG Fortnite, this is the season that I want to go back to. This is the season of OG Fortnite that I want to play, and really I believe that this is the epitome of what peak Fortnite can be with this season. I mean, come on, we had Drift. I mean, maybe the most iconic skin in Fortnite, or at least one of them. Come on, this season was absolutely amazing. And most other seasons, even for OG Fortnite, pale in comparison to this one. I absolutely loved the season, and this was the first season I ever actually got to play. Going over to my friend's house for the first time in Season 5 and playing the game for a good 10 hours straight shows you just how much I loved this game from the first time I touched it. And this season was just something else, so this season has to be my 3rd favorite season of all time. Season 5? That's not very controversial. Well, these next 2 seasons, my top 2 favorite seasons of all time, are going to completely change your opinion of me probably, because I believe that this is what makes me have one of the most unique opinions in all of Fortnite. Because my 2nd favorite season of all time, a season that not very many people were a fan of, is Chapter 2 Season 3. Oh my goodness. This season, it feels kind of weird to say is my 2nd favorite season of all time after going through all of these seasons, But this season, first off, the map. This is a map that, for me personally, rivals my favorite map with the Chapter 1 map. That's how good the map was. The water map, I thought was going to be so lame. Oh my goodness, they're just going to put a bunch of water on the map, and it's going to be so boring. But this season legitimately brought so many small spots to the map that could be used as landing spots. All of these random little islands that I remember having so many people drop at was just such a different experience from any other season ever. And this season was probably the first season of all time, I think, where the emphasis has been more on shooting than building because of how sort of weird it was to build in the water and how, scarce mats were. It made it a lot more aim based than before, and I absolutely loved it. This season played a role in what I like to deem my favorite time period of all time in my life, the summer of 2020. I thought COVID was going to suck, but I got to play this season, and me and my friends every single day, we would go to the gym, then we would go to the pool, and we'd say, screw it, we're going to go home, and we're all going to play Fortnite together, and it was so fun. And I think that some of the things that bring this season down from being my favorite season of all time was, one, the fact that the pump wasn't in. The tac was nerfed so that the charged shotgun could sort of shine, and I think that the charged shotgun was a gun that I didn't like at first, but I sort of got used to it. Me and everyone else, I think, in the community sort of got used to it as the season went along, to the point where I actually didn't mind it anymore, and I thought it was a decent weapon. I'm still not very good with it, but I understand at least how to use it now. So I get why they removed the pump. I just wish they would have added it, because this was around the time I was getting good at the pump, because I was getting really good with the pump at the end of Season 2, and then they took it out. And they nerfed the tac, but it wasn't a nerf so much that it was completely unusable. And I think that the mythics this season were so fun, with the glider gun and the shockwaves. And my favorite gun of all time is Ocean's Burst. This was my drop spot. My second favorite POI of all time being the Fortilla. It was my drop spot this season, and honestly, so fun. Another thing that sort of brings it down is A, the water level drops too fast. I think it should have stayed up for a little bit longer. And B, the Marauders were really annoying. But other than that, this season was so fantastic, and I remember just waking up seeing my favorite battle pass of all time with one of my favorite maps of all time, and being completely blown away by the amount of changes, when for the previous seasons of the chapter we'd had very little changes. This was such a change in pace, and this was the first step in a good direction that I think Fortnite didn't necessarily take with Season 4 that came after it being my least favorite season. But oh my goodness, this season was my second favorite season of all time. And you can disagree with me. You can say, oh well, Coral Castle sucked, and oh well, the Marauders were annoying, and I personally didn't like the water map. But I'm gonna be honest, I don't care. This season was an absolute blast. I will never be more nostalgic over anything than this season. Even Chapter 1. Chapter 1 I have a lot of nostalgia for, and sometimes want to go back to it so bad. But I just remember the times I had playing the game in Season 3, listening to my rap playlists, and just absolutely popping off, getting win after win after win on one of my favorite maps, if not my favorite map of all time. I still don't know. But oh my goodness, this season, you can hate it, but it is my second favorite season of all time. I fully understand why people hate it. I mean, I get it. But when I'm thinking about a season where the most changes we've ever had to the map in the history of Fortnite happens after having almost no changes, I have to rank it this high. And I loved it just so much. We had Pleasant Park change, Sweaty Sands change. I'm not going to go through the POIs. Almost every single POI changed. Plus we had Catty Corner, which was hype. The Authority, which was literally just, in my opinion, a better version of the Agency. It's so good. We got cars for the first time. We got LTMs back. I mean, come on. And I understand why people hate it, but for me personally, this is my second favorite season of all time. I'm gonna stop talking about it now, because I'm going on a bit of a rant here, but I just love it that much. Now I imagine you're probably thinking, Caden, if you love this season that much, why is it not your favorite? Well, there's one season, a very controversial pick for my favorite season of all time, but there is one season I believe is better than this season. Not by a ton, but it definitely is better, and that is Chapter 1, Season 9. Ladies and gentlemen, my favorite POI of all time. Now this is, yet again, a very controversial pick, because people didn't like combat meta, and people didn't like the map, but me personally, I loved this season. This is the season of Chapter 1 I got to play the most of. This is the one I actually had it on my own for the longest, and just played, I mean, at least a couple times a week, which for me was a lot, and I really got to understand the game a little bit more. But at the start, nobody really understood the combat shotgun. We thought some of the map changes were weird, but in the end, I came to love the combat meta. Once the pump came back out, I felt like it had a really good balance of being able to pick what you wanted with your shotguns. And this is when the World Cup happened, which was just an amazing time. My favorite live event, the mech versus the monster, happened. Oh man, this season had to be my favorite season. I'm one of those weird people who actually likes the Neo POIs, so the revamped Loot Lake and the Neo Tilted I actually thought was cool, along with one of my favorite POIs of all time being Mega Mall, when it's literally Retail Row. So the people who like Retail Row, which is not me personally, I think it's cool, but it's not my favorite. It's the people who liked Retail Row, got Retail Row just with a better version of the store, and oh my goodness, it was just such a good season. And I understand once again why people don't like it, but for me personally, it is so nostalgic, it is so crazy. I just remember going over to my friend's house, listening to this stupid what emote is it? It's one of the like really gay, like lovey ones, but it's so nostalgic, and it's like my favorite emo basically now because of how nostalgic it is. That was the music track he had on it. Just little things like that I remember being so integral to this season. I understand once again why people don't like it, but this season was my favorite season of all time. I think the meta and the loot pool was one of the best we've ever had. I think the map, once again, was one of the best we've ever had. It had all the best parts of the previous maps, plus a little bit different. And I know Tilted Towers is still better than Neo Tilted, but I did like Neo Tilted. We had a great battle pass with my favorite tier 100 of all time. We had slipstreams for mobility. Oh man. And not to mention the 14 days of summer event being literally my favorite period of Fortnite ever. It was just so much fun compared to any other game I'd ever played that when I eventually got grounded from it again, I didn't want to play any other game because I realized I was not going to have as much fun as I did playing Fortnite. And all of these changes, I think, combined to make the best season of all time, and I will always remember that as being my favorite season of Chapter 1 and my favorite season of all time. Ladies and gentlemen, if you enjoyed this video and somehow managed to make it this far, you are my favorite person in the world, and I absolutely adore that you did that for me. God bless you, man. Thank you so much for making it this far. I have spent probably a good 2 or 3 hours straight recording this video, so if you would drop a sub or at least just like the video, then that would mean the absolute world to me. And go ahead and comment down below what your favorite season was and what you agree with and disagree with on this video. Thank you guys so much for watching this video. I cannot express it. God bless you. Have an amazing day, and I hope to see you in another video. This has been yet another Fortnite video by the Anti-Sweat. I love you all, and I'll see you in the next one. Adios.